Ambassador Elena Vance walked through the long white corridor of the Galactic Council station, and her boots made a sharp sound against the polished floor with every step she took. This was a sound she had heard thousands of times before, but today it felt different, heavier somehow. Like each footstep was carrying the weight of billions of human souls behind it. The corridor was lined with statues of the 12 founding species of the Council, and humanity was not among them. Humans had joined the Council 300 years ago, long after its creation, and they had never been given the honor of a statue in this hallway. Despite everything they had done for the galaxy, Elena stopped for a moment and looked at the statue of the Ascended Ones. A tall and elegant species with 4 arms and skin that shimmered like silver. They considered themselves the wisest beings in the universe, and they looked down on humans the way a teacher might look at a child who could never learn. She had spent 20 years as an ambassador, and in all that time, she had never once received genuine respect from any Council species. They used humanity. They needed humanity. But they never respected humanity today. That would change, she thought. And she continued walking toward the great chamber. The doors opened automatically as she approached, and the noise of the Council hit her like a wave. 12 representatives from 12 species sat in a circle around the central platform, and they were all talking at once in their own languages, while translation devices hummed softly in the air-high coordinator. Tef Volume of the Meridian Collective raised one of his 6 tentacles to call for silence, and the chamber slowly became quiet. He was a large creature with gray skin and eyes that never seemed to blink, and he had led the Council for 50 years with a mix of calm words and quiet manipulation. Ambassador Vance, he said in a voice that sounded like stones grinding together. You requested an emergency session, and the Council has granted your request. Please speak your concerns. Elena walked to the center of the platform and looked around at the faces watching her. Some looked bored, others looked annoyed, and a few looked curious about what the human had to say. 3 days ago, she began, this Council voted to cede humanity's colony on Kepler 442b to the Vreth Dominion as part of a peace agreement. This vote happened without any consultation with human leadership, and it affects 12 million human citizens who have lived on that world for over a century. The representative of the Ascended Ones, a female named Ambassador Yil, waved one of her 4 hands dismissively. The matter was urgent, she said in a musical voice that somehow still sounded condescending, and the Vreth were threatening war if we did not offer them something of value. Kepler 442b was the logical choice because it is on the border and easily defended by Vreth forces. It is our home, Elena said, keeping her voice steady even though anger burned inside her chest. And you traded it away like cargo. Your species is young, Teth Volume said, and you do not yet understand how galactic politics work. Sometimes sacrifices must be made for the greater peace. And this was one of those times. Sacrifices. Elena repeated the word slowly. And tell me, Coordinator, when was the last time any of your species made a sacrifice for the greater peace? The chamber went silent, and several representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Humans have served as the primary military force for the Council for 200 years. Elena continued, her voice growing stronger. And we have lost millions of soldiers defending worlds that do not belong to us. Human engineers built the trade routes that make your economies function, and human scientists solved the Theta Plague that would have killed billions of Meridian citizens. She paused and looked directly at Teth Volume. What have you given us in return? No one answered, and the silence was answer enough. You call us young and emotional, Elena said, and you laugh at our customs and mock our art. You treat us like servants who should be grateful for the opportunity to serve, and when we ask for recognition, you pat us on the head and tell us to wait our turn. Ambassador Yil stood up from her seat. and her silver skin flickered with irritation. "This is inappropriate," she declared. And the council did not gather to listen to human complaints. "If you have a formal protest regarding Kepler 442b, you may file it through proper channels." "Proper channels," Elena laughed, and it was not a happy sound. "I have filed 347 formal protests during my time as ambassador, and do you know how many were even read?" She held up her hand and made a circle with her fingers. 0. The chamber erupted into noise as representatives began talking over each other. And some were angry, while others seemed confused by this display of human emotion. Elena reached into her coat and pulled out a small metal disc. It was humanity's sigil, the symbol that represented their membership in the Galactic Council. And it had hung on the wall of this chamber for 3 centuries. She walked to the wall where it was mounted and carefully removed it from its place. "What are you doing?" HFY demanded. And for the first time, Elena heard something like concern in his voice. "I am taking back what belongs to us," she said. And she tucked the sigil into her pocket. She turned her back on the council and walked toward the exit. And every eye in the chamber followed her. "Ambassador Vance," HFY called out, "if you leave this chamber, you will be abandoning your position and your responsibilities to the galactic community." Elena stopped at the doorway and looked back over her shoulder. "The Galactic Council has made it clear that humanity's contributions are unwanted and our concerns are unimportant," she said. And her voice was calm but carried across the entire chamber. "So we will honor your wishes and remove ourselves from your affairs." "You cannot be serious," Ambassador Yale said. And she sounded more amused than worried. "Humanity needs the Council. Without our protection and trade agreements, your species will struggle to survive." Elena smiled. But there was no warmth in it. "You will miss us soon," she said. And then she walked out of the chamber within 1 hour. Every human staff member on the council station had packed their belongings and boarded transport ships. Within 12 hours, human ambassadors across the galaxy received orders to return home immediately. Within 1 week, every human vessel, soldier, scientist, and contractor had withdrawn from council space. The borders of human territory were sealed, and ancient defense networks that had been dormant for centuries came back to life. These were weapons and shields that humanity had built in secret. During the long years when they served the Council and learned that trust must be earned and not freely given on Earth, people gathered in the streets to watch the announcement from their government. Prime Minister David Chun stood before the cameras and spoke words that would be remembered for generations. "For 300 years, we served the Galactic Council with honor and dedication, and we asked for nothing but respect in return. Today, that respect was denied for the final time. And so humanity will walk a new path, alone if necessary, but free." Back on the council station, the representatives looked at the empty space on the wall where humanity's sigil had hung. And some of them laughed while others shook their heads at what they called human foolishness. "They will come crawling back within a month," Ambassador Yale predicted. And she smiled with the confidence of someone who had never been proven wrong in her long life. "Perhaps," HFY said. But his voice was thoughtful, and his eyes did not leave that empty space on the wall. He remembered something that humans had said to him once. Long ago, when he first became High Coordinator, they had told him that humans were survivors, that they had crawled out of the mud of their homeworld and reached the stars through nothing but determination and refusal to quit. He had laughed at them then, just as Yale was laughing now as he stared at that empty wall. He wondered if he should have listened more carefully. 3 months had passed since the humans left, and High Coordinator HFY sat in his private office staring at a stack of reports that seemed to grow taller every single day. Each report brought new problems, new emergencies, new disasters that nobody seemed able to fix. And they all had one thing in common: The humans used to handle this, the report said. Again and again and again, he picked up the first document and read it slowly, and his tentacles curled with frustration as he absorbed the information. Trade route deficiency had dropped by 34% across the entire council network, and ships that used to arrive in 3 days were now taking 5 or 6. The human navigators had designed those routes over centuries of careful study, and they had mapped every asteroid field, every gravity well, every shortcut through dangerous space. No other species had ever bothered to learn these paths, because the humans had always been there to guide them. Now the humans were gone, and ships were getting lost. The loom set down the report and picked up another one, and this news was even worse. The agricultural worlds of the Meridian Collective were sending desperate calls for help because their terraforming engines were failing one by one. These machines were incredibly complex and required constant maintenance from engineers who understood their inner workings. Those engineers had been human, and they had trained no replacements because nobody had asked them to. Because everyone assumed the humans would always be there. We need human engineers, the report concluded, or these worlds will become barren within 2 years. The third report came from the border regions, and it painted a picture of chaos and fear. Piracy had increased by over 200% in the last 3 months, and cargo ships were being attacked almost daily by raiders who had once been too afraid to operate in Council space. The peacekeeping forces that had patrolled those sectors were gone because those forces had been mostly human volunteers. No other species wanted to do such dangerous work for such little pay, and humans had done it because they believed in protecting the innocent. Now there was no one to protect any own. Ed Valoom threw the reports onto his desk and let out a sound of pure frustration. He had been a politician for most of his long life, and he had always believed that any problem could be solved with the right words and the right deals. But these problems required something he did not have. They required humans. A chime sounded at his door, and he called for the visitor to enter. Ambassador Yeel glided into the room with the grace that all Ascended Ones possessed, but her silver skin was flickering with agitation. "We need to talk about the human situation," she said, without any greeting or pleasantry. "I am aware of the problems," Tethvolume replied, and he gestured toward the pile of reports on his desk. "These are not problems," Yeel said, and her voice was sharp. "These are catastrophes waiting to happen. My own homeworld has just reported that 3 of our oldest libraries are losing power because the maintenance systems are failing." "Let me guess," Tethvolume said. "Human engineers designed those systems." "Human engineers built those systems," Yeel corrected him, "and they maintained them for 300 years without a single failure. We never thought to learn how they worked because we are the Ascended Ones, and such technical matters were beneath our concern." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "We were fools." She admitted Tethevol had never heard an Ascended One admit to being wrong about anything, and he realized that the situation must be even worse than he thought. "What do you propose we do?" he asked. "We must send an envoy to human space," Yeel said, "and we must ask them to return. We can offer them better terms, more recognition, whatever they want." "And what about our pride?" Tethvolume asked, and there was bitterness in his voice. "Pride will not keep our ships flying or our worlds alive." Yeel repleateth. A volume considered her words for a long moment, and then he nodded slowly. He would bring this proposal to the council, and perhaps together they could find a way to fix what they had broken. But even as he agreed, a small voice in his mind whispered that it might already be too late. Meanwhile, beyond the sealed borders of human space, something extraordinary was happening on Earth and on every human colony. The mood was not despair, but determination. Free from the council's restrictions and quotas and endless bureaucracy, Humanity had begun to innovate at a pace that would have terrified their former AI scientists who had been forced to share their discoveries with. Council species now worked only for humanity, and they made breakthroughs that had seemed impossible just months before. Engineers who had maintained alien systems now built new human systems that were faster and stronger and more efficient factories that had produced goods for Council. Markets now produced weapons and shields and ships for human defense, and the military grew stronger every single day. Prime Minister David Chun stood before his cabinet and reviewed the latest reports. And unlike Teth Volume, he was smiling. "Our economy has grown by 12% in 3 months," he said. "And our technological advancement has accelerated beyond all projections. It seems that freedom agrees with us." "There is more good news," said Admiral Marcus Stone, a tall man with gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. "We have made contact with 17 species that the Council dismissed as primitive or unworthy of attention. They are eager to trade with us and to form alliances." "The Council's rejects," Chen said, and he laughed softly. "They threw away these species just like they tried to throw away us." "These species are not primitive," Stone continued. "They are simply different, and they have resources and knowledge that the Council never bothered to understand. Together, we are building something new, something better." Chun nodded and looked out the window at the blue sky of Earth. Somewhere out there, the Galactic Council was struggling to survive without human help. And part of him felt satisfaction at their suffering, but another part of him felt only sadness, because it did not have to be this way. If the Council had shown humanity respect, if they had treated humans as partners instead of servants, then everyone could have thrived together. "Do you think they will come asking for help?" he asked Admiral Stone. "They will," Stone said with certainty. "The question is what we will say when they do." Chun turned away from the window and faced his cabinet. "We will say no," he declared, "at least for now. Humanity gave the Council 300 years of loyal service, and they repaid us with contempt and betrayal. They need to understand that our help is not something they can demand or expect. And if they offer us what we wanted," asked one of his ministers, "recognition, respect, equal treatment?" Chun shook his head slowly. "Words are cheap," he said, "and the Council has proven that their words mean nothing. If they want humanity back, they will need to earn our trust. And that will take more than pretty speeches and empty promises." He paused and looked around the room at the faces of his people. "For now, we focus on ourselves," he said. "We grow stronger, we build alliances, and we prepare for whatever the future may bring. The galaxy is watching, and they will see that humanity does not need the Council to survive. We never did," Admiral Stone added, and his voice was proud in the Council chamber, where humanity's sigil had once hung. The empty space on the wall seemed to grow larger every day. Representatives who had once laughed at human foolishness now sat in nervous silence as report after report brought news of failure and decline. The humans had been the glue that held the Council together. And now that glue was gone, and everything was slowly falling apart, they had thought humanity needed them. And they had been so very wrong. 1 year had passed since humanity left the Council, and War Commander Vrex of the Vreth Dominion stood on the bridge of his flagship and smiled with all 3 rows of his sharp teeth. He was watching a recording of Vreth soldiers marching through the empty streets of Kepler 442b, the human colony that the Council had given to his people as a gift, but the gift had been hollow. And his smile faded as he remembered the anger he felt when his forces first landed on that world. The humans had evacuated every single colonist in the 3 days before the handover. And they had not just taken their people. They had taken everything. Every piece of technology, every scrap of data, every machine and tool and weapon that could be moved. They had even taken the seeds from their gardens and the fish from their rivers. What the Vreth found was an empty shell, Buildings without purpose, roads that led to nothing. A world stripped of everything that made it valuable. They made fools of us, Rex had said to his emperor. And the emperor had agreed, but the emperor had also seen an opportunity in this insult. Because the council had shown weakness by giving away human territory. And weakness was something the Vreth understood very well. Weakness was something to exploit. Rex turned away from the recording and looked at the tactical display that showed the current positions of his fleet. 50 warships were spread across the border between Vreth space and council territory. And each ship was testing, probing, looking for more weakness. Report, he commanded his second officer. A female Vreth named Kyla stepped forward and saluted. In the past month, we have conducted 17 raids into council territory, she said. And we have captured 3 mining stations, 2 fuel depots, and 1 communications relay. Council forces responded to only 4 of these raids, and their response was slow and poorly coordinated. Casualties? Rex asked. Minimal on our side, Kyla reported. And we have taken over 200 prisoners, mostly Meridian workers and Ascended 1 technicians. Rex nodded with satisfaction. In the old days, such raids would have been suicide, because human warships would have responded within hours. And human soldiers would have fought with a ferocity that even the Vreth respected. But the humans were gone. And the council species that remained were soft and weak and afraid of violence. What about the council's response? Rex asked. Kyla made a sound that was the Vreth equivalent of a laugh. They have issued 12 formal condemnations of our actions, she said. And they have demanded that we return the captured stations and release the prisoners. Demands. Rex repeated the word with contempt. They issue demands, but they do nothing to enforce them. This is not how you deal with the Vreth Dominion. He turned back to the tactical display and studied the positions of council worlds near the border. Prepared the fleet for a larger operation. He ordered. We have been testing their defenses with small raids. And now it is time to take something bigger. Something that will show the entire galaxy that the Council is no longer able to protect its own. What target do you have in mind, Commander? Kyla asked. Rex pointed to a world on the display. A planet called Thesan Prime that glowed with the golden light of an advanced civilization. The jewel of the Ascended Ones, he said. Their greatest libraries. Their most sacred temples. Their cultural heart. If we take this world, the Council will never recover. Kyla's eyes widened slightly, because even she had not expected such ambition. Thesan Prime has orbital defense platforms, she said. And a garrison of Council troops. Defense platforms designed by humans, Rex replied. And without human technicians, those platforms are operating at half capacity. As for the garrison, my intelligence reports that it consists of 3,000 soldiers, and fewer than 100 have any real combat experience. He bared his teeth in what might have been a smile or a threat. The Vreth Dominion has 10,000 warriors, who have known nothing but war since birth, he said. And we are not afraid of librarians and scholars. On the Council Station, High Coordinator Teth Volume received the latest intelligence report with growing horror. The Vreth were massing their forces near the border, and their target was almost certainly Thesan Prime. He immediately called an emergency session of the Council, and for once, every representative arrived on time and with genuine fear in their eyes. We must do something, Ambassador Yiel said, and her silver skin was pale with worry. Thesan Prime holds the accumulated knowledge of my species for over 20,000 years. If it falls to the Vreth, everything will be lost. What would you have us do? Asked the representative of the Kel Union. A small reptilian creature named Ambassador said, Our military forces are scattered and undermanned. We cannot defend against a full Vreth assault. Then we must ask for help, Yiel said. And everyone in the chamber knew what Teth Volume had already tried. 3 months ago, he had secretly sent an envoy to human space, carrying a message that begged for military support against the growing Vreth threat. The response had come from Fleet Admiral Marcus Stone, and Tethvolume had read it so many times that he had memorized every word. The Galactic Council made clear that humanity's contributions were unwelcome and unappreciated, the message had said. And so we will honor your wishes and remain uninvolved in council affairs. Best of luck. It was polite, it was professional, and it was absolutely devastating. The humans will not help us, Tethvolume told the council. I have already asked, and they have refused. Then we must offer them more, Eel insisted. Money, territory, whatever they want. I suggested that, Tethvolume replied. And Admiral Stone's response was that there is nothing we can offer that would make them return to serve a council that betrayed them. The chamber fell silent as the weight of those words settled over everyone present. Perhaps we could hire human mercenaries, suggested Ambassador said. Individual humans who might be willing to fight for the right price. Tethvolume shook his head. Humanity has implemented a strict policy, he explained. No human citizen will accept any contract from any council species, not for any price. They have completely cut us off. This is madness, Eel said, and her voice was rising with panic. We gave them everything, and now they abandon us in our hour of need. We gave them nothing, Tethvolume said quietly. We took their labor and their blood and their genius, and we gave them nothing but contempt in return. Now we are learning what that contempt has cost us. The council continued to argue for hours, but they reached no solution because there was no solution. They had spent 300 years depending on humanity, and they had never prepared for a future without them across the galaxy in the comfortable safety of human space. Admiral Marcus Stone read the intelligence reports about Vreth fleet movements with a careful eye. He knew what was coming, and he knew that many innocent beings would suffer when the Vreth attacked. Part of him wanted to help, because humans did not like to see innocents suffer. But another part of him remembered Kepler 442b, remembered 3 centuries of insults and exploitation, remembered the way the council had laughed when humanity walked away. He set down the reports and looked out at the stars. They made their choice, he said to himself, and now they must live with it. But even as he spoke those words, he wondered if humanity could really stand by and watch while an entire civilization burned. The wolves were at the gate, and the sheep had no shepherd. What would humanity do when the screaming began? The sky above Thesan Prime burned red as Vreth dropships descended through the atmosphere like a swarm of angry insects. War Commander Vrex watched from his flagship in orbit, and his 3 rows of teeth were bared in a grin of pure predatory joy. The battle had been easier than even he had expected. Orbital defense platforms, those mighty weapons that had once struck fear into the hearts of any who threatened this world, had fired only 6 shots before falling silent. Their targeting systems had malfunctioned, their power cores had fluctuated, and their crews had panicked when they realized that nothing was working the way it should. Human engineers had designed those platforms, and human technicians had maintained them for over a century. Without that expertise, the mighty weapons had become nothing more than expensive metal floating in space. All platforms neutralized, reported Kyla from her position beside him, and ground forces are encountering minimal resistance. The garrison appears to be retreating toward the capital city. Do not let them escape, Vrex ordered. I want this world secured before the council can even think about sending reinforcements. Not that reinforcements would come. Vrex knew that the council fleet was scattered across a dozen different systems, and they would need days to organize any kind of response. And by then Thesan Prime would belong to the Vreth Dominion on the surface of the planet. Ambassador Yeel ran through the streets of the ancient city with terror in her heart. Around her, other Ascended Ones were fleeing in panic. their silver skin flickering with fear as they tried to escape the advancing Wrath soldiers. She had never known violence like this. Her species had not experienced war in over 8,000 years, and they had forgotten what it meant to be hunted, to be prey, to be helpless in the face of an enemy who showed no mercy. An explosion shook the ground nearby, and she fell to her knees as a building collapsed in a shower of stone and dust. When she looked up, she saw one of the great libraries burning, flames consuming knowledge that had taken millennia to collect. "No," she whispered, and tears streamed down her face. This cannot be happening, but it was happening, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She forced herself to her feet and continued running, joining the flood of refugees heading toward the spaceport where evacuation ships were waiting. If she could just reach those ships, if she could just escape this nightmare, then perhaps she could find a way to save what remained of her people behind her. Wrath soldiers advanced through the city with brutal efficiency. They had been born for war, trained for war, and they had spent their entire lives waiting for an enemy worthy of their skills. The Ascended Ones were not that enemy. They were scholars and artists and philosophers, beings who had devoted themselves to the pursuit of knowledge rather than the practice of violence. And they fell like wheat before a scythe by nightfall. The capital city had fallen, and Vrex walked through the ruins with his boots crushing ancient artifacts beneath his feet. He stopped before the great central library, the largest repository of knowledge in the galaxy, and he watched it burn with something like satisfaction. "Should we try to save any of the records?" Kyla asked from behind him. Vrex considered the question for a moment, and then shook his head. "Knowledge is power," he said, "and we do not want our enemies to have power. Let it burn, and let the galaxy see what happens to those who cannot defend themselves. Across the stars, on every world with access to communication networks, beings of 1,000 different species watched the fall of Thesan Prime with horror and disbelief. This was supposed to be impossible. This was not supposed to happen. The Council was supposed to protect them, but the Council had protected nothing. And now everyone understood that the old order was dead. High Coordinator Teth Volume sat in his private office and watched the destruction on his screen. And for the first time in his long life, he felt truly helpless. He had failed his people, failed the Council, failed everyone who had trusted him to keep them safe. His communication device chimed, and he answered it without thinking, expecting another report of disaster from his aides. Instead, he found himself looking at the face of Prime Minister David Chun of Earth Coordinator Teth Volume. Chun said, and his voice was calm but his eyes were hard. "I have been watching the events at Thesan Prime, and I felt it was time we spoke." Teth Volume straightened in his chair and tried to compose himself. "Prime Minister," he said, "if you are calling to gloat over our misfortune, I must tell you that I am not in the mood." "I am not calling to gloat," Chun replied. "I am calling because I have a question for you." "Ask it." Chun leaned forward slightly. "When you voted to give our colony to the Wrath," he said, "did you think about what would happen next? Or did you assume that someone else would deal with the consequences?" Teth Volume closed his eyes for a moment, and the weight of his mistakes pressed down on him like a physical force. "I assumed that the Wrath would be satisfied," he admitted. "I thought that giving them what they wanted would bring peace, and instead it taught them that you were weak," Chun said. "It taught them that you would sacrifice others to protect yourselves, and it made them hungry for more." "I know," Teth Volume said. "I know that now, and I would give anything to undo what we did. But I cannot." Chun was silent for a long moment, and Teth Volume could see something working behind his eyes. Some internal debate that would determine the fate of billions. "Humanity remembers what the Council did to us," Chun finally said. "We remember the insults and the exploitation and the contempt. We remember being treated as servants and being discarded when you no longer found us useful." He paused. "But we also remember that there are innocents on those worlds who never voted against us. Beings who had no voice in the decisions that harmed humanity. And we cannot punish them for the sins of their leaders. Tethvolume felt hope rising in his chest. A dangerous feeling that he was afraid to trust. What are you saying? Yashchun took a deep breath. I am going to make a broadcast, he said. A message to the entire galaxy, and I want you to watch it. After you have heard what I have to say, we will speak again. The connection ended, and Tethvolume immediately switched his screen to the Galactic Communication Network. Within minutes, Prime Minister Chun appeared on every screen on every world. And his face was serious but not unkind. This message is for all beings in the galaxy, he began. And especially for those who now live in fear of the Wrath Dominion. He paused and seemed to gather his thoughts. 1 year ago, humanity was betrayed by the Galactic Council, and we chose to withdraw from galactic affairs. We sealed our borders, we went silent, and we let the Council face the consequences of their actions without our help. Many of you suffered because of our absence, and for that I am sorry. We did not leave to punish the innocent. We left because we could no longer serve an organization that treated us with contempt. But the situation has changed. The Wrath have shown that they will not stop until they have conquered everything. And if we do nothing, countless beings will suffer and die. Chun's eyes seemed to look directly at every person watching. Humanity has always believed in protecting the innocent, he said. And we will not abandon that belief, even for those who have wronged us. Therefore, I am announcing that the human fleet will engage Wrath forces at Thesan Prime within 24 hours. We do this not because the Council asked us, and not because we forgive what was done to us. We do this because it is right, and because humans do not stand by while innocents are slaughtered. He leaned forward. But let me be clear about something. This is not a return to the old ways. We are not servants of the Council, and we will not be treated as such ever again. After the Wrath are dealt with, there will be a reckoning, and the galaxy will need to decide what kind of future it wants. Until then, hold on. Help is coming. The broadcast ended, and across the galaxy, beings who had lost all hope felt something new kindling in their hearts on Thesan Prime. Ambassador Yeel huddled in a refugee camp and wept with relief on the Council station. Tethvolume stared at his screen with wonder and shame, and in the darkness of space, the human fleet began to move. 300 warships carrying the finest warriors humanity had ever produced. Heading toward a battle that would change everything, the wolves had come to feed. But they did not know that the shepherd was returning. War Commander Vrex stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the human fleet emerge from slipspace. And for the first time in his life, he felt the cold touch of fear in his heart. 300 warships appeared in perfect formation, moving with a coordination that seemed almost impossible. These were not the scattered, poorly maintained vessels that the Council used. These were weapons of war built by a species that had learned to survive in a hostile universe. How is this possible? Kyla whispered beside him, and her voice was trembling. Our intelligence said that humans had fewer than 100 combat vessels. Our intelligence was wrong, Rex replied. And his voice was steady, even though his hearts were racing. The humans were building in secret while they served the Council, preparing for a day when they would need to fight alone. That day had come, and Rex understood that he had made a terrible mistake. The human flagship, a massive vessel named the Defiance, moved to the front of the formation, and a communication request appeared on Rex's screen. He accepted it and found himself facing Fleet Admiral Marcus Stonestone was an older human with gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. And he looked at Vrex the way a predator looks at prey that has wandered too close. War Commander Vrex of the Wrath Dominion, Stone said. You have 20 minutes to withdraw all your forces from Thesan Prime and return to Wrath space. If you comply, No further action will be taken today. Rex bared his teeth in what he hoped was a confident smile. The humans offer mercy? He said, I did not expect that. Perhaps your species is weaker than the stories say. Stone's expression did not change. The mercy is not for you. He replied, It is for your soldiers, many of whom are young and were simply following orders. I am giving you a chance to save their lives. And if I refuse? Stone leaned forward slightly. Then I will destroy your fleet, he said, and I will pursue your forces all the way back to your homeworld. And I will burn every military installation your species possesses. The Vreth Dominion will cease to exist as a military power, and your people will spend the next century rebuilding from nothing. Rex felt his confidence draining away as he looked at the human's face. There was no bluff there, no empty threat. Only the absolute certainty of someone who knew exactly what he was capable of. You are bluffing, Rex said. But his voice was not as strong as he wanted it to be. I have 300 warships carrying weapons your species has never seen, Stone replied. And I have 50,000 soldiers who have been training for exactly this moment. I am not bluffing, and you have 18 minutes remaining. The communication ended, and Rex looked at his tactical display with growing despair. The human ships were taking positions around his fleet, cutting off all escape routes, and their weapons were powered and ready. Commander, Kyla said, what are your orders? Rex thought about the Vreth warriors on the surface of Thesson Prime, 10,000 of his finest soldiers who trusted him to lead them to glory. If he fought the humans, most of them would die, and the Vreth Dominion would lose an entire generation of warriors. He thought about his emperor, who had ordered this campaign and who would blame Rex for its failure, no matter what decision he made. He thought about his own pride, which screamed at him to fight, to die with honor, to show the galaxy that the Vreth never surrendered. And then he thought about the human ships surrounding him. And he knew that pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. Order the withdrawal, he said, and the words tasted like ash in his mouth. All forces are to return to Vreth space immediately. Kyla stared at him with disbelief. Commander, the Emperor will. The Emperor is not here, Rex interrupted, and he does not see what I see. If we fight today, we die today, and the Vreth will have nothing left but our honor. And honor does not rebuild fleets or raise children. He turned away from the tactical display. Order the withdrawal, he repeated, and pray that the humans keep their word on Thesson Prime. The Vreth soldiers received the order to retreat with confusion and anger. They had won this world. They had conquered the mighty Ascended Ones. And now they were being told to give it all back without a fight. That orders were orders, and within hours. The Vreth had evacuated the planet and were racing back toward their own space with the human fleet following close behind. Admiral Stone watched them go with satisfaction. But he knew that the work was not finished. The Vreth had retreated, but they had not been defeated. And they would try again unless something fundamental changed. Pursue them, he ordered. And do not stop until every Vreth military installation is destroyed. We end this threat today. The next 3 months were a nightmare for the Vreth Dominion. Human ships appeared in their space without warning, striking at military bases and weapons factories with surgical precision, destroying everything that could be used to wage war while leaving civilian populations untouched. The Vreth tried to fight back, but their weapons were useless against human shields. Their tactics were anticipated before they were even planned. And their warriors fell by the thousands against soldiers who seemed to have been born for combat finally. The Vreth Emperor sent a message requesting unconditional surrender, and Admiral Stone accepted it without celebration or pride. War was not something to celebrate, even when you won back on the Council Station. High Coordinator Tethvalium watched the news of the Vreth surrender with relief and shame. Humanity had saved the galaxy, and they had done it without the Council's help. proving once and for all that they had never needed the council at all. A few days later, Ambassador Elena Vance returned to the council chamber for the first time in over a year. She walked through the same corridor where the statues of the founding species stood, and she noticed that a new statue had been added at the end. It was a human, standing tall with arms outstretched, and beneath it was a simple inscription: "For those who serve." 10th volume met her at the entrance to the chamber and bowed deeply. "Ambassador Vance," he said, "I cannot express how grateful we are for humanity's help. You saved us when we did not deserve to be saved." Elena looked at the old coordinator with eyes that held no anger, only a tired wisdom. "We did not save the council," she said. "We saved the innocent beings who would have suffered if we did nothing. There is a difference." "I understand," 10th volume replied, "and I want you to know that things will be different now. The council has voted to give humanity full recognition, equal representation, and a formal apology for the way you were treated." Elena smiled, but it was not the smile of someone who had gotten what they wanted. "The council no longer exists," she said. "Or at least, it will not exist in its old form." Tethful's tentacles curled with confusion. "What do you mean?" Elena walked into the chamber, where the representatives of all 12 species were waiting. They looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and fear, unsure of what humanity would demand in return for saving them. "The old council failed," Elena said, addressing all of them. "It failed because it was built on hierarchy and exploitation, on the idea that some species were better than others. That system created the conditions that led to this crisis, and it cannot be allowed to continue." She placed a small device on the central platform, and a holographic document appeared in the air above it. "This is a new charter," she explained, "written by human hands but open to amendment by all. It establishes a galactic assembly to replace the council, with equal representation for all member species, including those that the council dismissed as primitive or unworthy." The representatives began reading the document, and Elena could see surprise on their faces. The charter was fair, even generous, offering protections and rights that the old council had never provided. "Why?" Ambassador Yeel asked, and her voice was filled with genuine confusion. "After everything we did to you, why would you offer us this?" Elena turned to face the Ascended One, and her expression softened. "Because revenge is easy," she said, "but building something better is hard. Humanity could have conquered the galaxy after defeating the Vreth, and no one could have stopped us. But that is not who we want to be." She looked around the chamber at all the faces watching her. "We want to be partners," she continued. "Real partners, working together to build a future where no species is exploited and no one is sacrificed for political convenience. That is worth more to us than any empire." 10th volume stepped forward and extended one of his tentacles toward Elena. "Then let us begin," he said. Elena took his tentacle in her hand, and around the chamber, other representatives began rising to their feet, moving toward each other, reaching out across old divisions and ancient grudges. It would not be easy. Centuries of mistrust could not be erased in a single day, and there would be challenges and conflicts and setbacks along the way. But for the first time in galactic history, every species would face those challenges together as equals and humanity. The young species that the council had once dismissed as emotional and primitive would lead the way into a new era of cooperation and hope. Elena Vance looked at the wall where humanity's sigil had once hung, and she saw that a new one had been placed there, larger than before, and positioned at the center where everyone could see it. She smiled, and this time it was genuine. "Welcome to the future," she said.